Welcome to the Spirit Guides Network Radio. This is your host, Mark Chatterton speaking. I will be interviewing Hazel Courteney today. Good evening. I would like to extend a warm welcome to journalist and author Hazel Courteney, who has had 7 books published to date. Hazel has written about alternative health subjects for several years now, having written for both the Daily Mail and the Sunday Times. In 1997, she was voted Health Journalist of the Year. Then, the following year, she had what she described as a spiritual emergency or near-death experience. Hazel wrote about this experience in her first spiritual book, Divine Intervention, which was published in 1999. This was followed by her second book in 2005, Evidence for the Sixth Sense, detailing about what happened to her next in her life. Finally, in 2010, Hazel has just brought out her latest spiritual book, Countdown to Coherence, which brings the story right up to date, with many interviews with scientists and spiritual people who are linking the gap between spirituality and science. So, a big warm welcome to Hazel.
That's a lovely introduction. Thank you, Mark.
That's fine. Right, I'll start off with the first question, going back to your spiritual emergency, the experience that you had. Could you describe to the listeners what this involved and what it was like for you?
Sure. What happened was I was, back in April 1998, I was a journalist, a weekly columnist with the Sunday Times with an alternative health column. And I was busy going about my life. And I used to live most of the week in London and part of the week, the weekends, in fact, in Birmingham, which is where my husband's company was at the time based. And what happened was I walked into Harrods, the world-famous store in London, on April the 8th, 1998, and as I went through the turnstile, which used to be in the bread hall, it stuck fast, and it wouldn't go forward and it wouldn't go back. And in those few seconds, it was like, the only way I can explain it is it was like a volcanic eruption of energy from the base of my toes right up through to the top of my head. And it was as if I thought there was this huge pain, just electrical tremors going through my body, and this huge pain in my chest and in my head. And within about 4 seconds, I heard this voice shouting in my head that I knew hadn't come from me, Hazel. And it said, "See a doctor now." And so, of course, you think, crikey, what the hell's going on? And I was so scared because I thought I'd had some massive heart attack or something. So I managed to, and then as that happened, the turnstile, for no apparent reason, moved forward. And I made my way out of the store. And I called my doctor, and he knew I wasn't joking. And they were there waiting for me at the doctor's surgery when I got there like 10, 15 minutes later. And I have to say, Mark, if you think that you have only got minutes to live, it really does focus your mind. And when they got me to the doctor, they laid me on the floor immediately. They thought I'd had a massive heart attack or some kind of heart attack. And they put the electrodes on my chest to measure my heartbeat. And as they started playing my heartbeat down the phone to a cardiologist, it was incredible. I realized that I could feel what the doctor was thinking in my head. And when I told him what he was thinking, I'm really not quite sure who was more shocked, him or me. And of course, then I suddenly intuitively knew that my heart was actually fine, which of course the cardiologist later confirmed. And so I went home, and the doctor meanwhile called my husband and said he ought to come home straight away. And I decided to take myself off to bed. But it was amazing. When I looked in the mirror at our London house, I looked really young, which was incredible considering the fright I'd just had. And my eyes were a different color. They were like an amazing sapphire blue. And when I got on the bed to try and sort of figure out what the hell was going on, I picked up the phone to ring a girlfriend. And then I realized that I was no longer in charge of my physical body because my arm just went into automatic and put the phone back in the cradle, which was rather incredible. And then when my husband came home, he said, "What on earth's wrong?" And I started blurting out, "Look into my eyes and you'll know who I am." But of course, I didn't know then, Mark, who the I was. And I found that I couldn't eat physical food. I know I'm thin, but I love food. I could hear whatever questions I asked. I seemed to get back dozens of answers. And I started losing weight very rapidly. And then by the Easter Friday, I developed an incredible fever that alternated with almost freezing to death. So obviously I took myself off to bed. And it was at that point that I just knew I couldn't call my own orthodox doctor. And I spoke to a couple of spiritual friends, and they said, whatever you do, just allow it to unfold and make sure you eat sugar to ground you. And of course, I didn't know at the time what the hell they were talking about. But anyway, then a friend, Dr. Richard Lawrence, suggested that I might be possessed, that I might have had a walk-in. And of course, I just thought he was bonkers, basically. And I got myself back to Birmingham. And then on the Easter Saturday, I had an incredible near-death experience with the doctor present when I left my physical body, because I'd lost a lot of weight in only 3 days, and I just don't think my body could take any more shocks. Like, for instance, my husband would try and turn on the television to take my mind off things, but I was able to look at the television set, and I was able to change channels using the power of my mind. And I knew I was pretty much 100% telepathic. I was becoming intensely psychic. I got this spirit voice going on in my head. I mean, I have to tell you, it was very, very surreal.
Yeah, it sounds very strange in normal terms.
It certainly does. But I now, looking back to my mind, what happened was in Harrods was that I believe that my Kundalini energy at the base of my spine actually blew.
Yeah.
And, of course, the veils between this reality and all other realities were lifted. But when that happens spontaneously, as it can do, it's quite difficult to cope with, or it can be. So the slower people become enlightened and the more they prepare, then they don't have to go through what I went through.
Would you say that before this happened you were quite interested in spirituality, or was it a complete surprise to you what happened?
Well, what had happened was for about 5 or 6, I can't remember exactly how long ago now, because obviously it's all quite a while ago, but what happened was the whole thing started years earlier when my next door neighbour died in Birmingham, and I went over to say how sorry I was to his wife. She was a virtual stranger to me, and she said, I'm not going to cry because I know I can speak to my husband anytime I like. And I thought the woman needed Valium. And it turned out that she was a spiritualist and that she could hear people who she said had died. And of course, I'd never heard anything about such subjects before. And she said to me, read a book. And she gave me a book called The Little Guidebook by Tony Neate. And I stayed up all that night and read it. And it was like this light went on in my head. And after that, I started meditating. And yes, I'd become interested in spiritual subjects. And about 3 months before I had my spiritual emergency, in fact, I'd been to Mother Mira in Germany to receive darshan. Do you know what that is?
Yes, yeah, sort of special blessing.
Yes, when she pulses divine energy through her eyes into yours. And when I was with Mother Mira, they said, what you need to do is before you go up and kneel before Mother, you need to make a wish as to what you would like to achieve from, receiving the blessing. And so I wished for an acceleration in my spiritual growth. So I say to anyone out there listening, be careful what you wish for, because
definitely.
You might get it, but not in the way you thought you were going to get it.
So obviously we haven't got time to go into it in too much detail, but you wrote a book about all this experience called Divine Intervention.
I did indeed, yes.
What was the reaction generally to that, would you say?
Well, it was mixed, but it kind of destroyed my credibility as a journalist, because some of the things that I wrote in there were fairly incredible, really. And as Professor Gary Schwartz at the University of Arizona said to me years later, he said, Hazel, it's easy to claim anything you like. He said, you can be claiming to be the reincarnation of whoever, Henry VIII or whatever. You can be claiming to be hearing from specific people in the spirit world. But he said, you have to be able and willing to bring your claims into a lab and do them again under scientific scrutiny, and then we can know whether your experiences were real or not. they were real to me. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I understand.
All experience.